Welcome, everyone. My name is Elizabeth, and I am the program manager for a women's leadership program called Everwise Women. You will learn a lot more about me, a little bit more about our program, as we go through the session today. But I actually want to kind of skip over all of the intros that we typically do and move right into the meat of the presentation. One thing that we know about conferences is that oftentimes we spend a lot of the conference time focused on the speaker and not as much time actually turning to the person next to us or the people next to us and learning from them. The goal of today's workshop is to give you all an opportunity to build connections with one another. We heard Shelley talk this morning about the importance of peer groups, the importance of mentors. It was a great little plug for this session now. We did not tell her to say that, don't worry. But we really hope that by the end of today's session, you leave with some good connections and you are able to better activate what it is that you learned at the conference today and continue that learning over the course of the next few weeks, months, if you're ambitious like Shelley, maybe even 12 years with your peer group. We can also do some reshuffling once we get into the workshop part of this. My goal is to spend about the first half an hour or so doing a presentation, having some discussion, and then we'll leave the second, or the bulk of the presentation, the hour, for you all to connect with one another. Goal of this is for it to be a dialogue. I firmly believe, working in this space, that there is a lot more that I can learn from all of you than you can learn from me, standing up here lecturing. And I approach this space with a lot of humility and the understanding that I don't know everything and that we can all teach each other and grow together. Let's start with a little bit of motivation. Oops. All right, build momentum again. Let's start with some motivation. How many years will it take to achieve global gender parity in the workplace? Throw out some guesses here. Why are we here? 20? Okay, I may have given away the answer there, but I like that there were some people playing along. I appreciate that, supporting women. So 79 years is the answer. And part of the reason that this is so resonant, well, that's the point, right? Part of the reason that this is so resonant for me is that not only, we may be living longer and longer, right? Shelley said 150 years, so let's give ourselves a little more optimism there. But if you think about the average lifespan right now of an American woman, it's 81 years, which means that babies being born today will have to wait their entire lives to see global gender parity in the workplace. We know that we can't wait that long. I don't think I have to say to anybody in this room that there is very strong research, there's a strong business case for more diversity and inclusion in the workplace. Diverse, inclusive organizations are more innovative, they're more agile, they're higher performing. We know that many companies are not at this place. They do not have diverse leadership, they do not have diverse teams. The barriers and challenges that prevent this from happening are fairly well known. Some of them are up here on this graph, but I think Shelley did a great job this morning with her backpack analogy of articulating some of what they are. There's gender bias, there's discrimination, there are concerns around sustainability, there's lack of access and opportunity to roles. Certainly a lot of what we have to do to address that is systemic change. Thinking about what we do at the organizational level. How are we thinking about recruiting, hiring, performance reviews? How do we educate leaders about bias and then actually get them to do something about it, which is the next step? We need to think about policy change, right? Better daycare, equal pay, things like that. Those are all very important. And I don't want to, by any means today, fight for those kinds of changes. But to your point, we also know that there is urgency around the issue. And that what is also important is for us to think about the strategies and solutions that we can employ as individuals and as a collective to push ourselves forward. That is what we will be focusing on today. We'll start with a quick overview of why relationships matter in the workplace. What are the 3 key relationships you should be looking to build? Then we will share our secret ingredient, what we think is so key to building those deep connections that will help fuel your career. And then we will give you a chance to put that into practice and to connect with one another. Any questions?
As a women, we all have more empathy, and then we do the empathy practice at work. However, when we practice empathy more and more, we are considered as, oh, just women, they just empathetic, and it's nothing to do with their way of delivering. So it's a workplace. It always happens. Even though you are empathetic, you are not taken seriously as an empathetic listener or empathetic being.
So I'm here was around actually women being seen as more empathic. And sometimes when you're empathic, not having that be taken seriously. So let's tackle that for a minute. When we get to the empathy piece, I will certainly address it. There's actually research that shows that to a certain extent, we are all more or less empathic when it comes to members of our in-group versus an out-group, which I think is interesting to play around with a little bit in the workplace. But I think what we want to do now is focus on why those relationships are important, and then we'll talk about how to activate that. First point to make here is that we know that skills matter when it comes to success in the workplace. What you know how to do, how well you do it, obviously affects your career advancement. But relationships, especially as you climb up the ladder, matter more and more. Relationships help you in 3 key ways. They help you sustain your ambition, they help connect you with the right opportunities, and then they help you succeed once you actually access those opportunities. What's interesting about ambition is that ambition is the combination of mastery of skill and then recognition of that mastery. So part of why relationships are important is that you do need somebody to see your skills, your ability, provide you with that motivation to continue, because otherwise you don't feel that incentive to keep going. Relationships also matter because they provide you with the opportunity to have that big promotion, to have the high-level project. Shelley talked about being passed over when the big exec came to Japan, right? And had the meetings with all the other executives. That would have been a place where she could have benefited from somebody saying, actually, you need to meet with Shelley. She's somebody who you need to have on your radar. They also help you succeed. I think Shelley, again, did a great job this morning of talking about different perspectives and why those matter. They give you more insight into how you might handle different situations that you encounter at work. The challenge is that men are much more likely to have mentors and sponsors. Men are 46% more likely to have sponsors, and Caucasians are 62% more likely to have sponsors. Unfortunately, this reflects the reality that people who are in leadership, tend to turn around and invest in people who are like them. So if we have more straight, cis, white men in leadership positions, they'll oftentimes be turning around and investing in the folks who remind them of themselves. When we think about workplace relationships, so sponsors was the stat before. There are 3 kinds of relationships. You can tell I like 3s. 3 kinds of relationships that you want to develop. The first is mentorship. Mentors are important because they are your guides. They help you navigate your career path. They provide you with the perspective and the insight. When we think about mentorship is often conceived as a one-way relationship. It's certainly true that you will develop a good relationship with your mentor, but I think Shelley said this morning, when you're with your mentor, you want to make sure that you listen. That's why we think about it as this one-way relationship. They're providing you with the guidance that you are then acting on. Sponsorship is a little bit different. Sponsorship is two-way. The key thing about sponsors is that they have to have influence in your organization. Typically, they're more senior, about 2 levels above you, and they are the ones who are pounding their fists on the table saying, Shelley has to get this promotion. She has to have this meeting. They're also providing air cover for you when things go wrong because they're helping you get the big opportunities. They know that learning is part of what happens, and you may fail. So the question is, do you find a sponsor or do you earn a sponsor? I think I'll turn that around quickly and ask this room. How many of you would say that you have a sponsor? Okay, so not too many people in this room. Yeah. So typically what happens with sponsors is that the sponsor will find the protege, right? And say, so-and-so reminds me of me. I think they're doing good work. I see them as a future leader. And so whatever it is, whoever it is, I'm going to invest in you. I think as women, we have to be a little more intentional about seeking sponsorship and about putting ourselves in the position to cultivate those relationships. So a lot of it is when you have the opportunity, how do you advocate for yourself? How do you highlight what it is that you're doing? How do you show the person in leadership that you are somebody that they would like to invest in? Typically, sponsorship, I mean, when it comes to mentorship, we'll often say you can directly ask somebody to be your mentor. Sponsorship isn't quite as overtly stated, but I do think you can develop that relationship by showing what it is that you can do, by, I think this is going on off, by continuing to do a good job to highlight. I don't know if it's me or if it's the microphone, but I'm going to keep going. And I think some of it also, too, and Shelley brought this up, is thinking about where you want to go. So who's the right person that you want to be sharing this with in order to develop that relationship? Yeah.
I have a question, like, as far as ratios between mentors and sponsors. I think Shelley mentioned that she has several mentors, but oftentimes it seems that most folks have one sponsor. Is that true, or should they attempt to get as many as possible?
Right. So when it comes to mentors, because mentors can be from within your organization, outside your organization, they're providing you with that one-way guidance. More perspective is better, right? We say that people should have many mentors. Think of it as your board of advisors, the people you go to when you have this challenge. When it comes to sponsorship, I would say it's less critical, but can still be helpful. What you really want to do is make sure that you have someone with a position of influence in the organization who's rooting for you. If it's a whole team, that's great. I think the challenge is that many times for women, even getting that one person and finding that one relationship feels like a stretch, and it's something that isn't happening. So to the extent that you can find more sponsors, that's great, but a lot of times, because of the intensity of that relationship, they're putting their neck out for you, they're taking the risk. It oftentimes will be one or two people, not a whole team. Yeah. So great question about the partner, which brings us to why we're all here today. Mentors are important. Sponsors are important. These are typically people who are above you, who can provide you with some guidance about where they have been. Peers are equally important. Lots of reasons for that. First of all, you get support for the challenges that you're going through. You get something called mirroring, which we saw this morning when Shelley was talking and everybody nodded their heads and all kind of made the same noise at the same time. It's seeing your own experience reflected in somebody else, which helps you feel less alone, provides some validation, and again, gives you that motivation to persevere. You also get the opportunity to engage with peers in real-world problem solving. When you have a mentor, sometimes you can do this. You can do it around specific challenges. What's nice about having peers is that you have, again, that wider network of people you can go to, more perspectives to tap into. You also, with your sponsor, do not want to be airing your doubts about whether or not you can do the big project they just gave you, right? Because they're putting their neck out on the line for you. And if you go and you say, I actually don't know how to do this, they might wonder why they invested in you in the first place. So the point from that message is not to say that you shouldn't have doubts and that you shouldn't seek guidance. Absolutely you should, and if you're getting the right sponsorship opportunities, you should feel that way. But then you should go to your peers or you should go to your mentor to get that guidance. Yeah.
Are there any pitfalls in having somebody who acts sort of as a mentor and a sponsor?
That's a good question. So I think the way I'll frame that is we often get the question, can your manager be your sponsor? And a lot of times people feel like their managers are really great mentors for them. And so they wonder, well, can't my manager also be somebody who's sponsoring me within the company? Theoretically, yes, but it takes a very enlightened manager to be your sponsor because they will want to sponsor you off their team. And when you are a good manager, you want to keep the best people on your team. So I think that's somewhat of the challenge when it comes with mentor and sponsorship. You really want to make sure for the sponsor that that is somebody who is invested in your advancement. Yeah.
And also the mentor and the peers can overlap too, because I had a mentor and it got where I gave him advice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think, and I was actually on a panel last week talking about reverse mentoring. Yes, there's a lot to be gained, I think, on both sides of the equation, especially when you think about intergenerational communication, showing different perspectives. So that's a great way to use that relationship. I'm mindful of time, but I want to share 2 quick examples of why relationship capital matters in action. I have done research previously on women's leadership, and so I'm a little bit nerdy about these things. Hope you appreciate it as well. Role modeling is incredibly important because it actually influences how people behave at work. The Journal of Social and Experimental Psychology published a study that showed, so the study asked women and men, college undergraduates, to argue a speech against or for higher tuition fees. The topic of the speech was irrelevant, but the women and men performed the speeches in a room with one of 4 posters in the background. Either Hillary Clinton, Angela Merkel, Bill Clinton, or no poster. And politics aside, that wasn't relevant to this. It was more about the gender of the person showing up on the poster. What the results of the study showed is that when women performed in a room or gave the speech in a room with the poster of Angela Merkel or Hillary Clinton behind them, they spoke for longer, they rated their own performance better, and independent evaluators rated their performance better as well. What was happening there was that the posters were giving this subconscious signal to the women that they should feel more confident, providing that role modeling. They were talking for longer, they were feeling more confident, and then it affected how they were showing up and how people perceived them. It's part of why having that mentorship and that sponsorship within your own company or outside of it, if you can find it there, is also important. We see the benefits of relationship capital when we look at feedback as well. Turns out that women are much more likely to get vague feedback at work in their performance reviews than men are. This is a problem because if you don't know what you're doing wrong, you can't fix it. And if you don't know what it is that you're doing right, you might not know to continue it. This study looked at 200 performance reviews of men and women at a technology company and found that 57% of women were given vague feedback, compared with 43% of men. And what's more important was that the vague feedback for women was correlated with decreased or lower performance reviews, but it wasn't for men. So men were told, oh, you had a great year, and got high performance reviews. Women were told, you had a great year, and got lower performance reviews. Women were also, by the way, much more likely to be told they were too aggressive. Right? Personality. Exactly. Well, and if you looked at what the performance reviews, the vague feedback was actually saying, a lot of it was tied to communication style. Whereas men's feedback, even if it was vague, was about business outcomes. Right? And so anyway, the reason I bring this up, going too fast, the reason I bring this up is that this is part of why it's important to cultivate those relationships and to support one another in this room with the kind of feedback that matters. Because if you can be clear, and Erin and I did this morning on the train, she told me, say this, don't say that, do this, don't do that. Erin's my colleague who's in the back. Then you will be better. And so it's important to find the people who can tell you the truth because they know you can handle it and that it's important for your career. So now that we know that these relationships are important, and that was an overview, I'm happy to talk more about the intricacies of all of them. Let's move to how we build these connections. You'll notice that the title of this talk was called Beyond Networking. That's because we have moved from thinking at Everwise about networking to building high quality relationships. There's a lot of research out there that shows that the best kind of learning is social learning. And actually, a lot of it suggests that learning must be social in order for it to be effective. When we learn together, we learn more. We actually learn it more quickly. We expand our action repertoire, which means that when we face a problem, we have a better idea or a broader set of different action steps we might be able to take, different considerations. We're also more resilient in the face of failure because we know we have people to support us, and we've heard about other people's failures and how they have bounced back from that. The last thing, and I don't really even think I need to say this, I think you experienced this already today, is that learning together is just more fun, which is part of why we think it's so important for the work that we do. One of the things that I did after I did research was go work at a design thinking consultancy. We leveraged empathy to help brands connect with their consumers and then develop new product and commercial innovation. It was a great experience. There was a lot of fun, interesting things that we did. But I think what was so impactful for me was to see the way in which empathy was transformative for brands and thinking about connecting with their customers as people that they served rather than just as people that they sold things to. That made me wonder, if empathy is so powerful for brands in the business space, what can it do if we think about using empathy to fuel social change? And as you can see from the quote, I'm not the only person to have noticed the transformative power of empathy, especially as it comes to advancing women. Quick question for the group. What is empathy? Putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Caring. Any other ideas? Shoes? Okay. So here's the thing. That was kind of a trick question because that is typically the answer. Putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. Being compassionate and caring, yes. I think oftentimes we go to putting myself in somebody else's shoes, in their exact place, right? And what I'd like to suggest is that empathy is not necessarily about matching the exact situation. Empathy is about matching emotion. The reality is that I can never put myself exactly in somebody else's shoes, partially because 3-inch heels make me feel a little uncomfortable. But it's about really being able to understand what that person is feeling and then use that as an access point into your own experience. So quick example for you. I have a former colleague who loves to go bike riding. And he was telling me about an experience, those of you who are from San Francisco, going bike riding down Market Street. Very busy thoroughfare, right? Pride Parade was there yesterday, or 2 days ago. He was telling me about this experience, and so I imagined myself in his shoes or on his bike, and I realized that I was not as excited as he was as he told the story. I realized that I was actually terrified. That was not an empathic connection. I put myself in his shoes or on his bike, and it was a totally different experience. To really connect empathically with my colleague, what I needed to do was think about a time when I felt excited, when I felt happy. And then I'd be able to understand or approximate what it is that he was experiencing as he rode the bike down Market Street. I think this frame for thinking about emotion rather than direct experience is especially helpful as we talk about diversity and inclusion in the workplace. The reality is we are all having unique experiences, and that it is very hard, especially for people who are in the in-group, to understand from their own exact situational experience what it is that it's like for other people. But by thinking about empathy, by using that as the way in, you can actually make the emotional experience something that each and every person can understand. When I think about empathy, the goal is to use connection to drive action. Action is the key differentiator between sympathy and empathy. When you say sympathy, basically you look at somebody and you say, wow, that sucks. But when it's empathy, you say this sucks because you feel it too. Quick 3-step process for thinking about making that empathic connection with someone. You have to identify the emotion they're experiencing. You have to ask yourself, when was a time when I felt like that? And then you tap into what it is that you needed at that time. So in the case of the bike ride, maybe Daniel needed a high five. What I would have needed was somebody to get me off the bike, give me a hug. So I wouldn't have gotten to that answer had I thought about my own experience, but I would have gotten there if I thought about an exciting opportunity or time in my life. As we head into the next section here, which will give you all an opportunity to connect empathically with one another, the key takeaway here is to be thinking about what experiences that you have that give you insight into the other person and what it is that they're sharing with you. We think about structuring all of our programs at Everwise around this empathic connection, about making sure that as mentors and proteges develop relationships, as women in our Everwise Women program develop relationships, they're getting at the heart of what matters to each person and really talking about what it is that connects them rather than focusing on all of the differences. Questions about this? Okay. What I do now, you heard about research that I did, you heard about some consulting that I did. I work at Everwise now, and I run a program called Everwise Women. We have about 150 participants right now in Seattle, San Francisco, and New York City. We're launching in LA and Chicago in the fall, so we're growing. And we help connect women who are at about the midpoint of their careers with the resources and relationships they need to continue to succeed. One thing that we have found be so powerful in this program are the peer connections. I think we knew coming in that skill development would be important. We knew that the mentorship part of the program would be important. We knew that hearing from amazing women like Shelley would, of course, be resonant and inspirational. But we have heard over and over and over again from women in the program that they find so much value from the peer group sessions. So we have, each program has a cohort of about 40 women, and we put women into groups of 8 to 10, and they meet regularly throughout the course of a year. Maybe they'll meet for 12 one day, but they meet throughout the year, and they have an opportunity to problem solve challenges that they're facing, as well as bond with one another and activate what they're learning in the program. Lucky for you all, you get to be a part today of setting up some peer groups here at the conference. Perhaps they'll live on, but we know that they'll be meaningful for the next hour or so, and definitely for the rest of the day. Before we head into the exercise, to set some ground rules, we have found that it's important to be clear at the outset about the expectations around peer groups and what kind of relationships we're building. Confidentiality is incredibly important, especially what happens today at the conference stays within the walls of the conference, this beautiful little red and blue room. We want to make sure that each person respects the opinions and the experiences of everybody else in the group. Empathy requires some courage and vulnerability, and we'll be asking you to share some of your own experiences, and we want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable doing that. Off of the point around empathy, we encourage you, as you do your peer group session, to use I statements versus you statements. It's one of the reasons that our peer group model, which you'll see in a minute, emphasizes experience sharing versus advice giving. You can't necessarily tell somebody exactly what they should do, but you can offer your own experience as perspective and hopefully giving them some ideas around how they might take the next step. You also want to make sure, if you're a little bit of a chatty Cathy like me, that you give equal airtime to everybody in the group. And you'll see in a minute, but one of the ways we do that is by being intentional around time that we give for each person to share and each person to talk. Let's keep all of ourselves honest today as we go through the exercise to make sure that everybody has a chance to share. What we'll do now is an abbreviated version of what our peer group sessions are. Typically, they're longer than an hour or so because there are people who want to share. But we always start with some bonding, so a way for people to get to know one another, to build that relationship. And then we go into what we call our case study. The case study is where one woman in the group, so it rotates throughout the course of the year. I think mic training is next up on my list of things here. It rotates throughout the course of the year. She shares a challenge, personal or professional challenge that she's currently facing, and then has the opportunity to hear experiences from everyone in the group that they think might be relevant to helping her think through the challenge. One thing that we have used when we launch our peer groups as a way to get people to connect is the question around, what is something you've experienced in your life that has caused you great joy? And what is something that has caused you great pain? Sometimes people see these questions and they have the moment of, oh my gosh, am I really going to share something with people I've just met? And I know you all are thinking, wow, I'm at a conference, I don't really know the women sitting around me. But that's how it is in our program as well. Some come from the same companies, but we make sure in every peer group to mix people up because we want to facilitate those connections across organizations. One thing I'll say to you is that we found this to be very effective when people open up. Please feel free to be as open, as comfortable as feels right to you. We also never ask you to do anything. This is true for our program, it's true for workshops. We would never ask you to do anything that we won't do ourselves. So I'll start first, and I'll share my 2 questions, and then we'll head into the tables, and each of you will take about 2 minutes to share with the rest of the group something that has brought you great pain, something that has brought you great joy. Great pain could be the Wi-Fi not working. It could be this mic just going off and on. or you can take it a little bit more seriously. Again, it's up to you to decide what you feel comfortable sharing. So when I do this exercise, I always start with great pain, because it's more fun to move to great joy. But one thing that caused me great pain was when I was in college. I was 18, and I came out to my parents. They did not take it very well. It's kind of an understatement. Wasn't allowed to go home for a while. Had some great, wonderful, amazing, gracious friends who supported me through it. Happy ending to the story is that I'm seeing my parents next weekend in New York. They're active parts of my life. But that was certainly something that was very traumatic for me at the time and shaped, I think, a lot of who I am today. Something that has brought me great joy was the last big job that I did at my last company. I was on my own. It sounds like a great pain at first, but it's not. I was on my own leading a project in 3 countries. Everything was going wrong. I was presenting with somebody who was super high up, and I did not know how I was going to be able to stand next to her and say anything of value. And it has turned out to be, I mean, the whole experience was the probably professional highlight. Come on, Mike. The professional highlight of my life, because I learned what I was capable of. And I remember calling my dad afterward and saying, I could do anything now. I could do anything. Nothing could be harder. And so I think that's a great example of how even the things that cause us challenge can actually be some of our greatest accomplishments and some of our greatest joys. So first of all, would love to hear, I'll be up here after the talk, would love to hear how this went for all of you, any other questions that you have. But one of the things that we always find so impactful at the end of this exercise, I think, is exactly what's happening back there, which is cards being exchanged and numbers being tossed around and photos being taken. We encourage you all to maintain these connections for the rest of the day and ongoing. Feel free to exchange numbers, addresses, all of that. Quick recap of what it is that we covered today. So this last piece with the peer groups put into place everything we talked about. We started by thinking through why relationship capital is important, have much more to say about mentorship and sponsorship, so feel free to ask me. Then we focused on peer groups and peer connections and why those are meaningful and how we build meaningful connections, which is about really being vulnerable, being open, and connecting empathically. What drives it all home is the peer group piece, where we have an opportunity to put the empathic connection into action. Hopefully those of you who were presenters today had the opportunity to gain wisdom, insight, expand your action repertoire by hearing from your peers, and feel ready and confident to go put something into place around your challenge this afternoon or tomorrow. Feel free to reach out to me, Elizabeth@geteverwise.com. I have business cards up here if you have questions or want to talk about anything else that we covered. We are doing a webinar, I think in 2 weeks, on how to use empathy to deconstruct unconscious bias. We also have a webinar coming up in August on mentorship and sponsorship. So we do these kinds of things all the time. Would love to talk more about it, get your questions answered, because as I said at the beginning, we feel like we learn so much from all of you whenever we do these workshops or come and talk and ask what you really care about and what you need to know. So thank you all. Feel free to spread out for lunch. We're in this room. You don't have to stay in your peer group, but you can if you want to. Or you can go tell the other conference participants what it is that you've learned from this session. Thank you so much.